Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, but there's no actual coffee. Each episode, we interviewed an expert in the field of law enforcement analysis to share their career-defining stories and to get their insights on the world. Please join us on recognizing and learning from these brilliant minds as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder. Our guest today was an officer for 30 years. He's a firearms instructor. He's a member of the Northwest Regional Crime Analyst Network. He's a certified law enforcement analyst with the IACA. In terms of IACA, he was a member of the Publications Committee, the Conference Committee, and was even on the executive board as Vice President of Administration. He is learning to speak Greek. He's a fellow homebrewer and a fellow runner. And I can personally vouch for him being a great and charismatic co-instructor. Please welcome Tony Berger. Tony, how are we doing?
We are doing great, Jason. Thank you for that introduction. That was nice.
But it is well deserved. You've accomplished a lot in your career. I want to get started with the show in your current position with the Real-Time Crime Center. Can you talk a little bit about the Real-Time Crime Center and how it's different and maybe the same as any other unit that you've worked for?
Yeah, well, our Real-Time Crime Center in Pierce County, Washington, which is just south of Seattle area in Washington State, upper left corner of the map. We began with a grant back in 2008 from the federal government, Byrne Memorial Grant. And the idea behind this Real-Time Crime Center was, and this is something that's happening nowadays everywhere. Everybody's got a Real-Time Crime Center. The fellow who got the grant was working for a regional support agency that supported the record keeping and the dispatching for the police agencies in this Pierce County. And his name is Mike Carson, and some of you listening may have remembered Mike because he was involved in the IACA early on back in the 90s. And anyway, he had retired from our department as a bureau chief, the Pierce County Sheriff's Department, where I worked most of my career. He obtained this grant to take crime analysis from what was more traditional to a real-time situation. And traditionally, we had found, he was a crime analyst before I was with Pierce County, we had found that we got a lot of information a day late, at the earliest a day late. We come into work and we get the information that happened yesterday from whatever sources. If we got the police reports, we got them, once they got written and handed to us, and this was back in the days of paper reports. Yes, when I started. Or if we had any kind of data access, it was usually from a dumb terminal, where we could look up what calls had occurred last night and so forth. And we did our analysis based upon what the information was that we had at our hands at the time. But what we always thought it would be really neat if we could do analysis, tactical stuff that was happening right when the calls were coming in. And so that we pitched the idea for this grant to actually house analysts in the dispatch center. We won the grant, and I was put on as the project manager of that grant. And it was $3.2 million, so it was a lot of money. We first toured other real-time crime centers that were out there, and not all of them, but a lot of them. So we went to New York and Boston, and we went to Houston and to Dallas and Chicago, and I can't remember where else. And we saw what they were doing. We wanted to see what they were doing and see how we could try to use what they were doing well and make it work for us with our smaller, jurisdiction, because we had, under 1 million people, and a lot of these places were huge. So what we found out was there was a combination of analysts and commissioned officers working in all these places. And that was to bring to the analyst the officer perspective, because they know what the job is, because they do it. And then also to add that, and what analysts do that officers don't do, because officers really, they concentrate. Some of them are really good at figuring out things from a global or a three-dimensional perspective, but they're busy doing their regular job. So we couldn't afford to have that much staff. We thought it would be a good idea to have former officers work as analysts, but we needed to have a specific type of former officer, one that was had some, computer data mining capabilities and so forth. So we really screened these people out, and we hired a team. We placed them in the dispatch center, and we gave them access to the actual dispatch, computer-aided dispatch program. So they could see the calls as they were coming in live, read the calls, do research, and then feed that information back into the calls themselves so that they are responding, even as officers were responding. One thing about computer-aided dispatch systems that I had found out, I didn't really, I knew what came out of them, but I didn't know a lot about how they worked, on a daily basis. I, as an officer, I spent some time in there, but not very much. But we sat in there and we learned that those computer-aided dispatch systems are really location-based. So if something happens at an address, they know what happened at that address. They can find out, look, what happened the last 90 days, 180 days, and so forth. What they're not good at least then, and the one we had, it wasn't good at what people, identifying people. There weren't people modules in this thing. So if somebody was a problem child at someplace in our county, and they went to another location, that kind of information was a lot harder to get at, wasn't easy to find. So our tactical team used other databases to look up information. And this really became an important thing because what had happened in our jurisdiction a year or two earlier was two officers went to a domestic type call. And it was a situation where this fella, his brother, adult brother, was causing problems in the house, and he'd come to stay there for a couple of weeks, and they wanted him out because he was being a jerk, so they wanted him out. So two of our office sergeant and one of our deputies, it was in a very rural area, so there wasn't much. There's nobody out working there, so they're the only two guys working. They went out, they talked to the brother. The brother said, "Sure, I'll go. Let's go. Let's take off." Because they're, trying to resolve the situation, and it wasn't really a crime. They just wanted him out. So the brother went upstairs to get his bag, his things, came down with a handgun and shot both of our officers, killing one and shooting the other one through the neck, who survived. And why I'm bringing this up is this guy that did the shooting had tons of history in our data system where he was unstable, he was threatening to police, he had made similar threats like this before, but in another part of the county, not even anywhere near this, right? But there's no way for the dispatch center to know that, and nobody told him that when his brother called. They didn't say, "Oh, by the way, he's they do ask him if there's firearms involved, and there weren't, at the time."
So the officers didn't know who they were dealing with, essentially.
No, because they never dealt with this guy before. It was, they work in their little area. It was, they had 50,000 people there, but they didn't know this guy. He was a problem in another part of the county, So this is the surviving officer, in that he came with us on some site visits, and he was all for this thing because of that reason. He's a bureau chief now with the sheriff's department, but he was all for this type of thing. And I have to say, we got it up and running, really charging going, probably about 2011. It's been really well received. We've had to cut staffing back because our grant money ran out, and that's the way it goes, and budget cuts and all that other stuff. So the police agencies are the ones that support the thing, after the grant money runs out. That is, and now I don't know, there's probably other real-time crime centers that actually have people in the dispatch center, but I haven't found them, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But we really, for that type of thing, we found that is really effective. A lot of officers said that, "Hey, this is great." We had situations where we would have a situation where we'd have, like, somebody's causing a problem, unwanted guest type situation. We do the background check. We find out that the fellow's on probation. In the call, it says that he's drunk and acting up. So then we call his community corrections officer, his probation officer, on the phone and say, "Hey, this guy's drunk over this house, and I'm pretty sure most of these guys they have a you can't drink, caveat on there. If you get out of jail early, you can't be drinking." as officers are there trying to resolve this situation, the community corrections officer shows up, revokes the guy's probation, and then they take him into custody. So they have a reason to do it. There's a lot of stories like that about how successful this thing is.
A couple of follow-up questions. What were the two officers' names?
Well, Kent Mundell, he was a friend of mine. He's the one who died, was shot and died. And then Nick Hausner is the bureau chief for the sheriff's department right now. He was the one who was shot and survived. Nick and I came on about the same time with the sheriff's office back in the 80s. And Kent came along a little bit later. Great guy, really funny. I used to work out at this one precinct, and there was a gym nearby that I would go at lunchtime and do workout. And Kent was there. He'd spend all day there working out. You'd think, well, this guy, he's got to be a stud if he works out all day. But basically, Kent talked. He would talk. And I love the guy, but he would come over there and he'd talk, and I'd say, hey man, I only got a half an hour here. Can you swat me or get out of here or do what? Yeah, he was a great guy. Just everybody loved him.
Oh, I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah, thanks.
So, also, you went in thinking that you wanted a former sworn officer to fill the positions. What was the rationale behind that?
Well, we couldn't afford both. We wanted somebody who had police knowledge, but also had analyst knowledge. And I'd also have to say, and I neglected to mention before, we did hire 2 traditional crime analysts, ones that were analysts only that didn't have to have prior police experience. And the reason is we wanted, if it's hard to get people up. See, we had this short window to get this thing up and running, right? Because we have the money. If we spend it and then it's not successful, it's harder to continue getting funding for the thing from our police agency. So the thought was, if we have somebody who already knows what a call is, knows what officers do when they go to calls, knows how they respond, but can also do the analysis, then we figured that they would have a better chance at making this thing successful. And it worked out really well in most cases. They did, of course, they did have the police knowledge, which was great, but it was kind of hard getting them up to speed on the analysis stuff. It was a little harder for some to get them up to speed on the analysis stuff, because there are so many things in today's world when you're doing, mining on people. So many sources, and you have to think 3-dimensionally. You can't just go, okay, I ran him in our global name search, and I came up with 2 times that he was in a reports, and so that's that. I'm done. You got to think critically about this thing. He might not have just been in a report, right? He may have been. His name might show up all over the place in the CAD system, right? But not in a report with his whole, first, middle, last name, his date of birth, and his height and weight. You got to think about that. Plus, there's all sorts of social media platforms out there that you have to search. Plus, we have other databases. The jail booking and reporting system that we have up here. You want to look in the pawn system to see if they have pawn activity, because that provides you information. We have a local court, homegrown court system, where you can search for information out of there where they may be found. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things to search. It's kind of like, you have to follow, you've done this, you have to follow breadcrumbs. You get a little bit of information here, and then you have to follow that trail till it kind of, either, broadens out to the point where you go, okay, well, I'm not going to find anything this way. Or it focuses your attention so you can actually find the information that you're looking for. And it's also time sensitive, because we're doing this while people are arriving, so it's not like you got all day to get this stuff done. So
in the beginning, how did you get buy-in from other units? Were you part of the standard operating procedure, or how did that work?
Yeah, well, what we did was, first of all, we had at the time, I think we had like 10 or 12 police agencies at the time that we were supporting. We now have 19 police agencies we're supporting. Most of them are little, but still, 19 is a lot of police agencies. So I grabbed one person with, one of our team, and I went to the police turnouts. I went to their roll calls, if you will. We call them turnouts up here. And I went to all of them with the team, and I explained in a real short period of time, because they don't have a lot of time and they get bored and they're trying to get out on the street. Real short period of time, what we are, And I passed out, we made up business cards with a phone number, with an email address, and with our computer-aided dispatch handle, so they could send us messages. And I said, all you got to do is just ask. If you're looking for something, all you got to do is ask. If you're out at a scene and somebody says, my boyfriend just beat me up and he took off with his friend named Stan in a red Chevy. Don't hesitate. Just ask us. We'll do the research. We'll try to find Stan in his red Chevy and where he lives so we could try to find your husband or whatever. And that's really how we started getting buy-in. We got a lot of skepticism. We got, this is another great program that isn't going to work. We got a lot of that, a lot of wiseacre commentary. But I didn't mind. I used to be one of them. I'd sit there and go, oh, great, another program is not going to work. And then one thing that really helped was going to the special units. So I went to the drug operation units and explained this to them because they always need somebody while they're out on the fly, taking pictures of drug dealers. They always need help identifying these people. And we really got in good with our local regional drug unit. And so they use us all the time. And then one thing that was kind of interesting is that they had the regional drug unit had, people from a couple of police agencies, but they also had a man from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms who came by. And this is, he was interested in things like, what kind of guns are floating around there so he could get federal gun charges. And he did this thing for us. He took our card and he called, not me, but one of our analysts, and he said, I need information on this fellow to see if you can find anything on him locally. And he didn't tell us, but he gave it to his own analyst team, the ATF analyst team.
Oh, this was a test.
Simultaneously. It was a little test. It was a little double-blind study. And they came back and said, locally, and they're in Seattle, up in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Said, locally, we can't find anything on him. And our analyst said, locally, I can't find anything on him. However, there's another person who's got the same first and last name who lives in a neighboring county. And that person's older, about 20-some years older. So it may be his dad. I thought it may be his dad. So I did some research on him and found some information on a social media page. Through that guy's social media page, found the subject that the ATF guy was looking for. And the guy had posted pictures of himself flashing guns.
Nice.
And he was a felon. And so the ATF guy went and picked him up, and he pleaded guilty once they showed him the pictures. And he got 9 years in federal custody. And so he came, his name was John Hansen, and he came and he sat down with us. He said, this is what I did. He goes, no, I'm going to use you guys from now on. And he did.
Now, in the beginning, were you 24/7?
Yeah. Well, no. Were we 24/7? No, we were off 4 hours. We're off 4 hours, 27. We didn't have enough people to do 24. Hey, that was also the beauty of Excel. Help me find a schedule for my guys. So I used Excel and took a couple of years worth of data and broke down the call volume frequencies, right? And did an area chart, like a heat chart on it. And so then I went, okay, it looks to me like these are the hours. These are consistently the hours that are the slowest. So we went 20 hours, 7 days a week, with mostly 2 people on, but sometimes only 1 person on.
Sure. What was the 4 hours that you were off normally during the day?
I think it was from 2 to 6. Yeah, it must have been 2 to 6.
In the morning?
2 o'clock in the morning, because the stuff died down a little bit after, the bars closed.
Sure. The reason I bring that up is when I was in Cincinnati Police Department, they started a real-time crime center, and I think they were only open 12 hours, and it might only have been during the weekday. And they got the nickname around the department as the part-time crime center.
Yeah. We had a weird and I'm not taking credit for this. We had a weird acronym for our center. It was called Lariat,
Wow.
Lariat, and it was the Mike Carson again. He's the one. He loved doing stuff like this. And our original agency that we worked for was called LISA, LESA, stood for the Law Enforcement Support Agency. So everybody around there says Lisa this, Lisa that, and if you're uninitiated, you think there's some gal named Lisa who's doing all this stuff for people, but it's not true. It's just that's what they called it. And so he called it Lisa's Accelerated Response Using Integrated Analysis and Technology, Lariat.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty cool. That's a lot of words, a lot of syllables. And then he had like a little lariat emblem. Somebody drew up, like went around, like, because we're gonna rope you in and everything. I don't even know if anybody knows what a lariat is unless you do crossword puzzles. But so he thought that up, and then I was like, I think I was the only one who knew what the acronym stood for. Later on, we got a new boss. We changed. It's a long story, but we changed from to a larger dispatch center in 2012-13. So we're called South Sound 911, and so we have all police and fire dispatching, not just a few agencies, all of them. And he didn't really like that, and so he just changed it to Real-Time Crime Center, which, yeah, that works, I guess.
So do you have any other lessons learned or any advice for anybody else that's considering creating a real-time crime center?
Well, I would say what you need to do is you need to show the agencies your success, because we were lucky because we got all this money, right? Mm-hmm. But if somebody wants to stand one up, you really want to go convince your agency to do these things, because I think it's a great way of dealing with it. But you need to get the buy-in, and what you really need to do, and this is difficult, really difficult, is be regional. Because we all say this all the time, criminals don't know any borders, blah, 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 blah. But the police departments still say, we're paying for it. I don't want you doing anything for those guys over there because we're paying for it. It's just the way, that's just the way organizations are. And so we were always agnostic as far as agencies. We didn't care who called us. We got calls from police agencies, got referred to us because they would call like our 911 center, like in the East Coast. And the 911 center normally, the call receivers would just go, well, we can't help you with that, and hang up. But then they got to go, no, I'll just send them over to those guys. Maybe they can help. And so we would do research for people there. I had a list one time of the agencies we helped in 1 year, and I think it was like 60 or 70 different agencies that we did work for. FBI, Postal Service, just anything that was law enforcement, we would do it. If somebody called us from like a private company, security or something like that, we'd say, we'll help, but you need to go find a cop to ask us, and we'll tell the cop the information and they give it to you, because we didn't want to get involved with the, private entities or something like that. But we would help anybody who asked,
Very good.
That's it. Be regional, and you need to have somebody who is a decision maker be on your team.
So I want to go back in time a little bit now. Talk about how you got involved in crime analysis and became the supervisor to the crime analysis unit for the Sheriff's Department.
So the Sheriff's Department started the crime analysis unit in the 90s because one of our lieutenants went to a Police Executives Research Forum conference. And I don't know, somebody was there. Maybe it was IACA. Probably was. It was before my time. And they went and said, hey, crime analysis. This sounds cool. We need to have one of those things. So they selected one of our detective sergeants and said, you're the new crime analysis guy. That's how this is a similar story to probably many people who are listening. You're the person, go. And so that person, that was Mike Carson, this guy I was telling you about, he started building it up. He went to conferences. He got involved in the IACA. He figured out how to get access to our records management system data, which is, of course, really important. It was different back then. It was a lot simpler. When he started, we had this is going to sound weird. So cops used to write police reports by hand. And so we had 4 tables in a database, and certain bits of information were taken from those and typed into the database by data entry people, but not a lot of stuff. So like the who, what, when, where, how, and why, no narratives, no nothing. So like what type of crime it was, where was it, what time was it, who was involved, their name and whatever. That's all the information that was put into this data set. And then around 1999 to 2000, we had a team, Lisa had a team that decided to go, let's do a records management system type thing. Let's go to like computer reports. And boy, you should have heard the stink then when that was happening about, I'm never going to write these are older officers. I'm never going to write on one of those newfangled machines. I'm going to write them on, is the same deal all the time. He kind of got this thing up and running, and then he got promoted, which is usually, that's also a familiar thing for a lot of people who are listening, who work with commissioned people. You work with somebody who's great, they get promoted, and they're gone. So somebody else has to come along. He had called me. I was working as a detective supervisor at the time, and he gave me a call and said, how would you like to do this particular job? And I had just sort of gotten into personal computers at the time. So I'm dating myself a bit. I had purchased a computer that was operating on Microsoft Windows 3.11 operating system, if you remember that. That was before they came out with Windows, the real Windows thing that they're doing right now. And so I was learning how to, work with computers, and this is before, again, dating myself, before the age of the interweb, the internet. They didn't have that kind of stuff going full bore, really. I mean, I'm sure it was out there, but you had to have you had to have something like AOL or, something like that to get on, dial-up modems, and you had to have somebody in between you to get on in your internet service providing thing. And anyway, those are the good old days. So he knew that I was into that kind of thing, so I thought, he came and asked me if I'd be willing to take on this job. And there were two other analysts working there. So there was a supervisor who worked and two analysts. And I said, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. So that's how I got involved in it. And I was just hired as the supervisor because we had a commissioned supervisor who was our rank was a detective sergeant. And then we had two analysts. And I thought, wow, this guy, he really thinks a lot of me. He called me up and, picked me for this job. Turns out that he had asked like two other guys beforehand. And they said no. So I was number 3. I found that out years later.
Mark Stallo just told me the same story.
Really?
A couple of weeks ago.
Jason Elder is a name dropper.
I was really proud of myself. And then it turns out, no. You're the only sucker who said yes. So that was in 2001, and the two analysts were Mike was really good at getting grant money, and he had hired the first one. He was to help reduce burglaries in the area, which was good, and then he talked our agency into keeping him on. And the second fella he had hired on a school-based partnership grant. So it was partner up with schools, and it was like a CEPTED thing, a crime prevention through environmental design thing. And we worked with a local school district to help them with security, and then we kept him on, which was kind of cool. So then basically I was introduced to the wide world of crime analysis, which is, Microsoft Access, which I didn't even know what it was, ArcGIS 3.2, one of the older ESRI programs, on how to do crime mapping. And back in those days, all of it was all centered around geocoding, because your data was for poop at the time. You couldn't get anything. And so, and so it was just like on the job training, and there wasn't a lot. I did go to Steve Gottlieb's first class, the intro to crime analysis class. And first class I went to was in Phoenix, and it was 117 degrees in the shade. Uh-huh. And it was Steve's class. That was good. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, that was really actually on the schedule for a podcast.
Oh yeah, he's great. He's great. We actually became friends after that. Kind of kept in touch and have kept in touch over the years. So that's how I got involved, and it was just sort of like building on itself. What am I supposed to do? I come in every day. There's a stack of papers, police reports, 6 inches high. What am I supposed to do with these? and little by little, and going to, and reaching out to people like IACA people early on for help. Chris Bruce, great help to young analysts, still is. A couple of Chris Gebhardt, I don't know if he's still around doing things. Guy in, oh no, he helped me out a lot. Hill, what was his first name?
Hill.
Brian Hill, yeah.
Yes.
Brian Hill down there, man, what a great guy.
He's missed. He is so missed.
I know. He was great at helping me with Excel and Access and stuff like that, and always ready to help, no matter when you got a hold of him. I always felt guilty. Yeah, great guy.
He did. He would write so much on listserv and contribute so much. And for those that don't know Brian or didn't know Brian, he passed away a couple of years ago. So, but he is truly missed.
Yeah, great guy.
So tell me a story how you earned your analyst badge.
I did a lot of stuff with thinking of different ways for other groups within our agencies to solve their problems, get the things that they need to get done. So I did a lot of that kind of stuff and a lot of supervising people, but I also was a working analyst because we didn't have the luxury of not, and still am, I guess. We didn't have the luxury of having a supervisor just supervise, right? Because there's not much supervision to go on. So I'll tell you a story. Here's the situation. One of our police agencies gets a call from a local fire department. Okay, so they have firefighter paramedics up here, and I'm sure they have them everywhere. And so one of the things that the firefighter doubles as a paramedic, and they go out on all of the medical aid calls, which is the majority of the fire department calls or medical aid calls, because they happen all the time. And then they go out there and they try to figure out what's going on with somebody. If somebody's involved in an accident and so forth, they have the ability to administer IV painkillers. Okay, so they have these in the paramedic vehicles, and they also have them in storage lockers in fire agencies, in fire stations. And there's a fire station on every corner. Don't get me going on the fire department versus police department, because I'll talk for an hour and a half on that. But anyway, there's fire hall on every corner, and our police agency has an old mobile home, that was in the same area, one. And so there's a lot of these locations, and the fire paramedics they could get stationed to different stations, so they're not always at the same one. They may get moved around during the course of a week or a course of a month or the course over 6 months or something like that. So they're all around. So here's what happens is that the fire administration calls the police and says, I think we got a problem here, because a couple months ago, one of our paramedics was out on a scene and was going to administer some painkillers, like really strong painkillers. I don't remember what the drug was. I'm sure it was opiate based, but he was going to administer this thing, and he noticed that the top of the bottle, it's a little tiny bottle with a rubber stopper in it, so you could stick the syringe through and suck out the juice and give it to somebody. And the little tamper-proof top looked like it had been tampered with, so he didn't use it, right? And he just used another one, and he reported that fact. And then another fireman in another location reported the same thing. So then we went and looked at a lot of these. We went to look in the drug lockers, and we noticed that a lot of these were like that. A lot of these bottles looked like they'd been tampered with. So we sent them back to Merck, the pharmaceutical company who sent them out, and said, we got a bad batch of these things, because these things have been tampered with, So Merck comes back and says, au contraire, when we sent them out, they were good. And by the way, these things have saline in them. So then the fire department went, it's not the manufacturer. Something's going on here. So that's when they called us, and they said, this is what or they called the police, and they said, this is what we got. The detectives working the case, and he says, well, do you have any suspects? Do you know who might have done it? Nope, we don't know anything about it. We don't know, we don't know anything. It's yours. Go. So what he did was, they have a system of drug lockers where they're connected, to a database. And then when anybody enters them, they have to be assigned a code, and they enter that code, and the code is then, in the database. But they don't have a personnel table. So this code could be, Jim Smith, But the same code could be Jimmy Smith or James Smith. If you get my meaning, it depends on when somebody entered this name into the database. So the code could be, it's usually a one person, one only type of code, but it's not like, really relatable type of situation. So he went to the tech person there, and they downloaded all of the data out of these drug lockers, and I think there were 8 or 10 or 12 of them or something like that, over like a year, and had this zip file with all this stuff dumped on it, and said, "Can you make any sense out of this?" So what I had to do is try to like figure out how is this data structured. It was actually pretty simple. It was more like just a flat file, but I had to kind of like combine them all together. And there were pages and pages and pages worth of these things. Combine them all together, then kind of solve for this Jimmy Smith versus James Smith thing. Get the dates and the times and all this other stuff. And then I had to go ask a bunch of follow-up questions like, who has access? I mean, I have their names, but who has access to these things? I mean, does everybody in the fire department have access? And it was basically, no, only certain people do, but there really wasn't much rhyme or reason. And then I said, how do you guys track for when drugs are taken out of these lockers? And like, because if you go out on a call, you have a box in the car that has the drugs in it, in the ambulance thingy. How do you know what went out of the locker and where it went? Well, we have a paper sheets and all these things, and they say, I took out X number of this and X number of that and X number of this. I said, well, who audits those? And they said, well, nobody really. So I go, okay, great. So anybody could go in there and write whatever they want, right? Or take stuff out, and then, because if somebody says, I took out 10 bottles of Dilaudid or something, does somebody go in there the next day and count them? No, they didn't really do that. So that's no help, right? That's no help. So I put this whole thing together, and I just did like a frequency graph on this thing to see if anything popped out. And sure enough, we have this frequency of people taking stuff out of these or entering the lockers, because that's basically all I got is somebody entering their code and going into the locker. And we have this column chart just spinning along, and then there's this huge spike of one guy, and then it's spinning along, down there and everything. And so I take one look at this and I call the detective, and they said, "What do you think?" So then we looked at it, and this one guy was just really prolific at entering the thing. So then, of course, you can't just go, oh, well, there's your guy. You have to go, is there a reason? I mean, maybe this is the guy whose job it is to replenish stuff. And then I come to find out that they don't just keep drugs there. They keep stuff like notebooks and pens and junk like that in some of these too, right? So it's not just set up, this is the drug locker, only go into this locker if you have to get drugs out of it. We also did a cross-check on days, because I didn't know, they work 24-hour shifts and days of work, and this guy was going in. He had the biggest frequency of going in when he wasn't on shift. And that's not against the law for him to go in there when they're not on shift, because they could be doing stuff. They're always over at the fire halls and stuff. Armed with that information, it looked like it was enough. He went down, sat down with the guy, and the guy goes, "Yeah, I got a problem." And he admitted it. He was doing it the whole time. What he had done was he would just use the stuff for personal use, and then he would fill the bottles back up with saline solution, put them back in the locker.
So initially, when you got the data, was that already in Excel form, or did you have to do a lot of manipulation to get it into Excel?
No, it was CSV,
Okay.
comma separated value file, and there was a bunch of basically it showed up as a transaction. So like there's a code. I had to figure out what these things were. So there's a code for open. Like, okay, at this date timestamp, here's a transaction column. Okay, what does that mean? And it has a code. So that means that door was opened, right? And then there's also a transaction when that door closes. And usually the door opens and closes within 2 seconds, right? Because you open the door and then it closes. Mm-hmm. And then there was some other transactions that were some other weird things that were in there. Some kind of resetting things and this, that, and the other. So I had to make sense of that. And since they were in comma separated values with headers and footers, so I had to clear out all the headers and footers and stuff. Or the headers and footers had information about the location. So the locations weren't in the data set. So I had to this whole batch of stuff is this particular location, identify it as such, then do it with the next batch, and do it with the next batch, the next batch, the next batch, and then conglomerate it all into one, flat file that could then be analyzed. So yeah, that took That took a lot of the time, hours and hours to get that stuff into that situation. I bet you I bet you the company has a program that does that just reads the data, like a graphical user interface. But nobody ever asks that question, when the officers never ask that question. Is there any way that we can get this data so somebody can read it? It's kind of like if you've done this where you have you have a target, like a drug seller or something like that, and then they will put the drug unit will put a tracker on a car, and then that tracker will send a signal, and it will give you a ping of a location. They call it, a ping location. And before, there were all these neat programs that were readily available. Like we use CellHawk. We use CellHawk for phone dumps and tower dumps and stuff. It's a great tool, by the way. I don't work for them, but it's a good tool. It will actually map out your pings. But before that, what they would do is these officers, they would get this thing, and then they would set it up so it sent an email every time there was a ping, every minute or whatever, every minute. And then they'd forward it to the analyst who's working for me. So I walk over one time and I see this Excel, she's working away, and I see an Excel sheet open, and there's a whole list of lat longs. And then every once in a while, I see her clip out a lat long and paste it into an Excel sheet. So I go, what are you doing? She go, well, they're sending me these pings from from this tracker. I go, and you take them out of, you have to take them out of an email and paste them into the Excel sheet? Yeah. I go, well, isn't there a way? I mean, doesn't this company have like a mapping deal or something like that? She goes, I don't know. He's just sending me the ping. So then I have to get a hold of the guy and say, and the officer says, I don't know. So then I have to backtrack it, and I find out who's, who sold them the tracker. And of course they have an interface that's showing the live pings, and all I have to do is get her an account, It's that type of thing that, my advice is don't work hard if you can work smart. If you can figure out, just think about this stuff. If somebody asks you to do something like this as an analyst, be willing to do whatever they ask, but also try to look into, an easier way of doing it. Because a lot of times the officers, they aren't really data savvy, and they won't ask the question because it just doesn't occur to them.
Well, at least it was free to get access to that. I worked with a records management company once that they had one price for getting data in, and then we started asking about reporting, and they're like, oh, you want us to pull the data out? Well, then here's this other cost plan for getting the data out. Like, why would you want a records management system where you could only get data in and not pull any data out, right?
It's insanity. And then they also act like they're doing you a favor, and it's like, it's my data. It's my data, right? Yeah. It's not yours. Did we sign a thing saying this is yours from now on? I think it's ours, right? Yeah. So give it. Can't I have it back? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't do me any good that way, Yeah.
Yeah. So how many records were there, do you remember, that you had to go through?
Oh, there were thousands of them. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of records. Because this was a long period of time. And, tens of thousands of records is nothing really. I mean, once you get the process set up, it's not hard to analyze. Mm-hmm. But it's like, okay, how am I going to get this thing, how am I going to be able to read it? How am I going to be able to get it so that it's all in one, thing to analyze? It's like if you get a cell book with a whole bunch of sheets of different information, you have to say, okay, now I have to do the lowest common denominator type of thing. How can I set a sheet up so that all of the information on all these sheets can be contained in one sheet? And then how do I do that quickly without having to copy paste and which is rife with errors? So then that's where, online message boards and Experience come in. Mr. Excel. I don't know if anybody ever goes to MrExcel.com. I haven't in years, but I used to be on there all the time when I was doing this kind of stuff. It's great. Just ask a question, free, and then get your answer, and away you go.
So how long was the guy swapping saline and painkillers?
Looks like it was about 8 months.
Okay.
Because it did look like it went back about 8 months. So that's a long time to get away with that.
Yeah.
And nobody noticed. Nobody noticed.
What did he get? Do you remember?
No, he pleaded out. He probably got, I don't know. Actually, I don't know I don't know what happened. I know he was pleading out. I know that it took a little while for the court case to go. And I do not know what he got. Fired. I know that.
All right. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about your perspective as crime analysis in a small jurisdiction. I want to talk about home brewing, and then we'll finish up. You're listening to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back. LEA Podcast is proud to announce another podcast is now available on our website. Analyst Corner Podcast, hosted by Debbie Osborne, ran from 2008 to 2009. I highly recommend the episode featuring Brian Hill. Brian Hill passed away in 2018, and he helped me out tremendously when I was a younger analyst. In the episode, Brian gives some great advice, suggesting who you should take out to lunch in order to get access to better mapping data. To listen to all the episodes from the Analyst Corner, click on the link at the top of our website. That's www.leapodcasts.com.
Hi, this is Sally Faribaugh, here to tell you that nobody needs to know what first car you have, or what's your pet's name, or what street you grew up on. We all see these on Facebook and we all want to answer them. But keep in mind that there are people who are reading them, and they're going to go on your bank account and they're going to say, oh, I forgot my password, let me reset it. And the bank's going to ask, what's the first street you lived on? What is your cat's name? And what color car did you own? And the person reading it, they're going to look through your questions and they're going to answer and they're going to get access to your bank account. We call that social engineering. So next time you see that survey, that questionnaire, don't.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking with Tony Berger, who was talking about his experience with Real-Time Crime Center and his badge story about the painkiller theft going on in fire department. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about your perspective with crime analysis in small jurisdictions. You taught classes on the building blocks of a crime analysis unit. Like, what are the pillars, per se, of a good crime analysis unit?
Yeah, sure. Usually, like I said before, what happens is somebody in an agency who has decision-making powers or influence with decision makers says, I heard about crime analysis from this source or that source or the other source, and I think we need to have a crime analysis unit, and I think that's great. I think they're right. What they first need to do is identify what their mission is going to be, because what will quickly happen to an agency that doesn't have a mission statement is the person will be the dumping ground for their analyst will be the dumping ground for everything. And a lot of the stuff that they'll start getting dumped with is the problem of the day. They'll be the whack-a-mole person. And what happens then is that person is time is tied up with just putting fires out, which are important to put out. Don't get me wrong. It's important to put out those fires. Usually it's not the line officers, the ones, the majority of the people that are working in that agency that then reap the benefit of the analyst. It's usually the administration, and that's cool. If you want to have, a planning unit or somebody like that help you out, that's great. But if you really want to have a real crime analysis unit where you're actually analyzing the things that the reason police agencies are there for, which is, interdicting, stopping crime, stopping people from doing things and prosecuting offenders and stuff like that, then you need to have a mission that says so, and then you need insulation from a lot of that other stuff that happens. Because I know when I was started, I got things like, gee, I know you want to work on that burglary series, but we are going to be, we're talking at the county council about such and such, and we really need a map of this area. So there you are, making a map in ArcGIS, spending a lot of time. And it's like, no, I don't really like the Times New Roman font on those street deals. Can you change that to something sans serif or something? So you spend all your time, all these little details making maps. And I remember, I think it was you. Yeah, it was with you. We were taking the CMAP, advanced CMAP class in Washington, D.C. That's where I met you, right?
Yes. I had totally forgot about that until right now.
Yeah. So
Stacy Belladin was in that class, and Mary Craig was in that class.
Yes. Yeah. I think Mary was like assistant teaching or something at the time.
Yes. And Dan Helms taught it.
Dan Helms. And that's just what I was getting. Dan Helms said, okay, and it was a small class. I think there's like 6 of us or something. And Dan Helms says, how many of you make maps for your jurisdictions? And everybody raised their hands. He said, stop doing it. And he said, why? He said, it's a waste of your time and talents. Anyway, that's what I was getting at with that whole thing, is it's a waste of your time and talents to make maps. There are map makers in the world. They make maps. Use them, but still, you have to do that. So what I was getting back to is that you need to have this plan of what your analyst is going to do. And if your analyst is going to be bought in by the rank and file, it has to be a tactical, strategic type thing, right? Not mostly administrative stuff, but tactical and strategic things that the officers need. Then once you identify what your mission is, you need to find the right person for it. And the right person may be your records clerk, but in smaller jurisdictions, it's almost invariably the records clerk that gets assigned that job for some reason. At least that's what I found when I was teaching these classes in small jurisdictions. What did you do? I was records clerk. Okay. Who's doing the records stuff now? I am. Okay. Bad idea. Because, try not to, if you can afford it, don't double dip the person. Have the person have to do a whole bunch of other stuff and then be a crime analyst, because when they get busy, they don't have time to do the analysis. And then you need to listen to your constituency, because not all crime analysis like agencies that have them are the same. Some of them, smaller agencies have differing needs than big agencies, and medium size and so forth. So you need to listen to what your people want and not tell them what they want. Not go, well, I went to a class and the class says this is what I need to give you. Burglaries were up 25% from last week to this week. And that your officers are going to go, well, duh, I took all the reports. I know when they're up. I mean, I know, I took the reports. So it's not helpful to me. I tried to instill that on our analysts. It's like, ask them what they need. What do they need? Do that. What do they need? Guy says, well, I need to have, I'd like to know where they are, not how many there were. I'd like to know how they are. How are you going to get that information to them every week without killing yourself, So it's basically know your customer. If you were to run a business or a restaurant, and you served a type of food in this area that they don't like and they don't eat, people aren't going to come to your restaurant. So don't do it because you went to culinary school and they taught you how to make pheasant under glass and then try to serve that in your rural jurisdiction, because they aren't going to eat it. You got to serve what they like. You also need to continue with satisfying your management. So if your management needs certain information and reports regularly, you got to still provide it. But I would say do your darndest to automate everything that you can do. Stuff like that. Automate it. So, front load the work so you don't have to continually do those types of things, those administrative reports or strategic reports. Don't build something that takes you all day. And I know I did this, but that takes you all day long to update, right?
Sure.
The computer's working you instead of you working the computer.
Sure. And it's a tough balance between getting away from the busy work, especially when that's the expectation of management and that's what you're being asked to do.
Yep. So if you can get help to get that stuff so that it just does it, so it does itself, that's great. That's the goal. That's the goal. Free yourself up to do the tactical work that your line officers need, because then they're going to love you if you do the work that they need.
Great. That's good advice. I want to switch gears to the IACA, because I mentioned at the top of the show that you were in several committees, publications, conference, and even on the executive board. And I forgot to mention mentoring. You've been a mentor for years as well. So what do you think is your greatest accomplishment with the IACA?
Oh, well, since people are the greatest accomplishments, I'll say Mindy, because Mindy was my first mentee and just started out in New Hampshire and just was great. I mean, just, asked tons of questions, asked advice on this, asked advice on that, then moved to Colorado, and is now running committees and doing magnificent work. and just a great person. Fortunately, got to meet her in person at a conference, and I can't take credit for her, her accomplishments. I was tongue in cheek, you know what I mean? But really, that I think the people, really the people are the most important part about the IACA, and I really believe that, because I used to have to go to training and stuff all the time, and I didn't like going, but I really enjoy going to training with the IACA because the people are great. They're great. It's like a family. It's like a big family, a big international family.
The conference is like going to a family reunion. After a couple of years, it is like going to a family reunion. You see the same faces year in and year out.
And they all help each other and freely give what they've learned, and really, it's just I can't say enough good things about the organization. Yeah. So that's my most pleasurable thing,
Everybody's going to think I set up that question because Mindy Hune is the writer for this podcast. And I was going to ask you directly if that was your greatest accomplishment.
Really?
You end up telling me that anyway, so you've ruined my punchline.
Mindy, we didn't collaborate on that.
And I told you before, I truly believe that someday she's going to be IACA president. If that's the route she wants to take, I think she's going to be president someday. So you heard it here first.
Yeah, I'd have to go along with you on that.
Hey, let's switch gears again and let's talk about homebrewing, because we're both homebrewers, and I want to just get your perspective on maybe some of your favorite recipes. I know you make your own recipes and you come up with really innovative ways to problem solve for the brewing process.
Yeah, I started that a while ago. I don't remember when I started. It was in the early 2000s, I think. I wonder what it was that made me think of starting out. I think I might have. I think I met a guy that I was working with who mentioned that he made his own beer, and I go, "You could do that?" Well, I didn't know you could do that. So I bought a book by a guy named Palmer. It's called How to Brew. And I read that, and I went, well, this sounds really interesting. It was like you can make whatever kind of beer you want to make, And basically, beer is just made up of 4 ingredients, It's water, it's malted barley, it's hops, and it's yeast. That's it. All beers are made up of that. Now, people will add things to them to give them other fancy little flavors, berries and fruit peels and coffee and junk like that, but you don't have to, You can make all stuff that tastes like those things just with those 4 ingredients. So I think it appealed because of the complexity you can get just with a few ingredients. It's kind of like, life. You can make a lot of different things, a lot of different permutations with just those things. Some of the things that I had to deal with is, where am I going to do this? And a lot of people started out cooking on their stovetop, and so that was my first beer. I was going to make a porter, and a porter is kind of a thicker, low hop beer. Hops are the things, for those of you who don't drink beer, hops are the things that make beer bitter. That's what they do. They bitter up your beer. That's what beer is bitterness and sweetness and bitterness kind of together in different combinations. So I was boiling this up. I was using what's called an extract. So companies will take barley grain, and then they will start I better speed this up because it's going to bore people to death. You start the fermentation process, then you halt it. And so what happens is the thing is full of sugar, and then you just steep it like tea, and you steep the sugar out. Well, then they steep out the sugar, and they make a thick, syrupy extract. It smells like, you ever had malted milk balls or malt in your malted milk, and you smell that center? It's kind of what it smells like. And it's a big, thick syrup. So that's an easy way to make beer. You just pour this extract in some water, boil it up, add hops, put it in your place to ferment with your yeast, and then you're done. And if you've done this before, you'll know what I'm talking about. What do you expect to happen my first time? I had a boil over. Boiled, thick, syrupy, malted sugar, water all over my stove in my kitchen. My wife wasn't too pleased with me. So the first thing I had to solve is, where am I going to do this? Because it took me, 2 days to clean the stove off and, for a lot of stuff. So where am I going to do this? So then I decided I would do it outside. And then I just watched guys online. I went and scrounged equipment. I scrounged a couple of old giant, regular beer kegs and cut the tops off them. Use those as the boil kettles and stuff like that to boil up the stuff, and then to transfer it from one thing to another without spilling it, because you could pour, but it's heavy sometimes if you do heavy boils. So I have a little pump with little quick connects that I can switch back between them all, and basically just made a little backyard brewery. A lot of fun, and then I would bottle it, right? So the first thing I would do is bottle this stuff. So you pour it into
work. That is a lot of
you
work.
pour it in a little bowl. You have to sanitize. And another thing that people don't realize is you have to be a nut about sanitization. So you clean everything, but you have to sanitize it, because if you get a little bit of a microbe in there, it'll grow. So what I ended up doing, I went to kegging. So now I keg, and I built a kegerator. And then I just use CO2 that infuses it out of a CO2 canister to do that.
Sure. Yeah, my first 5 batches were basically undrinkable, and I had to dump them. I had a problem with regulating the temperature. What I really miss is I had this one spot. I finally found this one spot in my house that I owned outside of Nashville, Tennessee, that was just year round. It was almost the same temperature. Like that 60 to 65 degrees, that magic spot for trying to brew beer. I've since moved to Tallahassee and haven't had a real chance to brew beer and try to get the temperature right and everything else. So it's been more of a challenge.
Yeah, that's the tough part. I was going to mention is that the yeast has to be the beer that's fermenting. The stuff that's done, it's fermenting, has to be a specific temperature between a range. Because if it's too hot, it kills the yeast. If it's too cold, the yeast goes to sleep.
Yeah.
So it won't work. So it has to be in that range. So I had built a few years ago a little shop. It was about 12 by 12 that I did like work in, and I had insulated it all around because it kind of got cold in the wintertime. And then I just put a little plug-in electric heater in there, and that I could regulate the heat in that room to ferment my stuff in there. Plus, if it kind of bubbled up, if it was like a Hefeweizen that was really, really bubbly, because what'll happen on these things is they bubble up through. You have to put a little thing on your bucket that you've fermented in, or your case, called an airlock, and so that the carbon dioxide can escape, but nothing gets sucked in. I didn't know this, but there's a million different kinds of yeast, and they're air, and if they get into your beer while you're cooling it off or something, it's called a wild yeast infection, and it'll ruin your beer. Your beer will taste like ink pens or bananas or Band-Aids or something like that. And like you said, I poured out many a batch because they tasted like that. Now they sell them as sour beers, by the way.
Yes.
The ones that I threw away. I didn't. Yeah. What did I know? I could have sold them as sour beers. Anyway. So, so it has to be the right temperature. And then if you want to have a lager, like all the beers like Bud and all these Miller High Life and all the Coronas, those are called lagers. It's a different type of beer, and it uses a different type of yeast. And it has to be cold. Uh-huh. It ferments at cold temperatures, like around a little bit over freezing, 35 degrees or so. So how do you keep something that cold? Just that temperature. That's tough. So I saw some guy had built a thing out of thick board insulation. And so I did that. I built this little chest out of foam insulation. It's about 3.5 feet high, 2.5 feet wide and everything. And then I put 2 chambers in it, and I went and I used these old milk bottles and would freeze water in these milk bottles. So there's 2 chunks, I'd have chunks of ice. And I'd set them in the one chamber, and I put a little fan in there, like a computer fan, and I hooked it up to a thermostat.
Old ice box.
Yeah, it's just a little mini ice box. And it just runs off of, the only thing that runs is the fan. Okay, so it doesn't take any juice. And when the temperature gets too high, the fan turns on and blows the coolness from the blocks of ice into the chamber to keep the chamber between 30 and 35 degrees. And then I just have to go in there every couple of days and replace the ice. So that works for lagers. And you can have those. Those are the crispy, clear types of beers, usually the crisp tasting thing. And a lot of people like those. I'm not a big lager fan, but I still have made them. Like Anchor Steam from San Francisco makes a good, there's a lot of other good lagers out there.
Yeah. So my favorite brew that I made was the recipe I got from you, which was the Blue Moon knockoff. What's your favorite?
My favorite is one that I make. I call it Green Dragon IPA, India Pale Ale. And I stole the name Green Dragon because I was a Lord of the Rings fan. I don't know if you've ever read The Lord of the Rings, but when the little hobbits were leaving their town to go out on their adventures, they stopped in a town nearby, and it was they stopped at this tavern called the Green Dragon and had their beer. And so that's why I stole that from there, and I made a label for it and everything like that. I really like that. It's my own recipe, so it's not, I didn't get it from anybody else. But it's not very, it's very light. So it's not like in color wise and in grain wise, it's pretty light. It's probably about 6.2 alcohol by volume. So it's not very, for IPAs, it's not very high in alcohol content, but it has a lot of hops.
Well, I think we probably made everybody thirsty now.
Yeah, it's a little early in the morning, so I'm not going to partake today. So
I have a last set of questions for you. This is a segment that I call At What Point, and what I'm looking for from you is 1 or 2 sentence answers. And so don't go into a lot of detail. Just give me 1 or 2 sentences for your answer, and try not to have the obvious answer. Try to come up with something that maybe somebody didn't think about as they hear the question. And just give me, as quickly as you possibly can, 1 or 2 sentence answers. Okay?
Okay.
All right, here we go. At what point do you move from an Excel spreadsheet to an Access database?
Automation, if I have to automate reports so that I can save myself some time, I would use Access.
At what point do you move from Access to a larger database?
When I have a lot more complex work to be done and I need computing power.
At what point is a crime map no longer the best option?
Or you're working on a crime series where the activity is continuous and ongoing, okay, and then you don't want a static map anymore.
At what point does a link chart become the best option?
At the end of a complex investigation where you need to impart your knowledge to another team or a prosecutor for prosecution.
And last one. At what point do you say it's not Greek to me?
Hopefully for me in a few months, because I'm actually teaching myself Greek right now to read the New Testament in Greek. But at the point where I say it's not Greek to me is when I actually find that I'm helping answer questions more than I'm asking them.
Now we move to our last segment, which is the words to the world. I give the guest the last word to the show. So, Tony, what are your words to the world?
All right. Switching gears, I would just say that if you do not know who Jesus Christ is, I would encourage each and every one of you to explore that topic.
Very good. Well, Tony, you were a great guest. I tell people you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later, and I appreciate your time here. Thank you, and be safe.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you doing this, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to the Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA Podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another expert in this great field.